wellness. I'm seeing a couple of names that are very familiar, as well as many who are unknown to me at this time. I'm Dr. April Harris Britt. I'm a licensed psychologist practicing here in Durham, North Carolina. What I want to first start out by doing is to give some acknowledgments to District 18, the Mentoring Committee, for co-sponsoring this with Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. What I'm hoping we can do today is to talk a little bit about how this pandemic, or what I'm going to talk about as a series of pandemics, how they're impacting our well-being, and hopefully think about some ways we can develop a new mindset and use some practical strategies for really taking care of ourselves in these really unprecedented times. So that's going to be our agenda for today. I am going to leave some time for questions at the end. And for those of you who have been with me before in similar presentations, we'll take a couple of opportunities to kind of pause and reflect throughout this presentation. So with that being said, let's get started. I want to talk about what I refer to as kind of the expectation trap. And so much of our lives is based upon us really relying on what we think are going to be planned and controlled events. We set forth throughout our day, we try and be very purposeful and very mindful, and then sometimes things don't happen in the predictable way that we expect. So many of us think about parenting. We plan that first day of school, oh, it's going to be so happy, and what we realize is that we're walking away with a screaming, tantruming kindergartner. Or how many of us have set some New Year's resolutions? I know that was so true for 2020. I'm going to get into shape, I'm going to work out, and again, reality can sometimes be very different. Or one of my favorite examples is the little boy who saw the cup of cocoa. And who doesn't love chocolate? Unfortunately, when he put it in his mouth, he realized that Hershey's cocoa does not taste like cocoa. So what happens when we really find that our reality does not meet our expectations? This has turned out to be true for 2020 for so many of us in so many different ways. And so some of you may have been thinking, well, she's going to talk about the pandemic. I'm going to focus on COVID, right? Well, yes, and then some. So when I think about a pandemic, I'm really thinking about an issue that is affecting people globally, in large numbers of people, and it just feels really pervasive. So we can talk about that at the medical level. Definitely the theme for 2020 has been about COVID. And what we're doing to kind of maintain, again, social distancing, how are we monitoring for our health, caring for loved ones, trying to go about our jobs, under even COVID precautions and conditions. But what I also want to add into this model of what I call interactive and cumulative stressors is the fact that we're also dealing with a very, very hostile racial climate. And again, it's not just here in the US, but this is something that we now are seeing being recognized even internationally. And it can also feel very pervasive, and it interacts with COVID. Last but not least, I'm going to add this to our pandemic list, is the political angst that so many people are experiencing right now, probably more than any other time in your life. And so when you think about how all of these things are impacting us, the list is indefinite. We can think about, again, everything from COVID precautions to how this is impacting our relationships with our friends or colleagues when we're thinking about the racial climate. Even just this week, I'm like, I'm going to take a break from Facebook because it can impact those relationships. It can impact your relationships with clients. When you think about the political angst, how is that impacting our financial planning on top of what we're already planning or unable to plan around regarding COVID restrictions, how that's impacted employment. The fact that we now have families that have had to change structure and or function because you have children who are being homeschooled, or you're trying to figure out what to do with your college student. So again, the number of ways in which all of these stressors are interacting with each other and building at the same time is unlike anything that I've experienced, I could say, in my lifetime. So it can be pretty overwhelming. We also know that it's impacting people differently. And that's for a number of different reasons, some of which I can acknowledge are socioeconomic, others around issues of privilege. But what we do recognize is that it's impacting everyone. Um, what I want to do is to go back to how we started, me mentioning the fact that our expectations can be very different from reality. And that with 2020 having all of these things culminate at once, that it's again something that we need to consider in terms of checking in with ourselves. What I'd like for you all to do is to take just about 2 minutes and really reflect on these questions, because I want you to check in. Ask yourself, what were your original expectations about this 2020 year? And when I talk about expectations, I mean those that you had for your family, for your job, maybe for your community, for your own life, your personal self. And so take a minute to think, what was I expecting to happen in 2020? And then when you reflect on those expectations, ask yourself, what do you notice? What do you notice about your thoughts? What do you notice about how you feel in your body? How are you been moving? And by that, I mean like getting about. How is it that it's changed the way you function? And so take just about 2 minutes and do some reflection and jot down the answers to these thoughts. How have our expectations been impacted, and how have those impacted how we're now feeling? So now that you've given that a little bit of thought, what I'm hoping is that some of you can recognize how this has individually impacted you. All of these different experiences. A lot of my work professionally focuses on trauma. And a thing that's occurred lots of times is me really asking, is this trauma? Or people asking me, is this trauma? And so I want to give kind of the definition. Trauma is the response to anything that's deeply distressing or disturbing, and it overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. And again, trauma doesn't have to be something physically happening to you. It could be perceptions of threat to yourself or to your loved ones. And that can be your family, but it could also be your community. Trauma can be experiencing a loss. Trauma can occur when you're witnessing or you even just know about trauma to others. So the reason why I offer this definition is because it gives us a little bit of a framework for thinking about how we've individually responded to, again, that culmination of COVID, plus the racial trauma, plus all the things that are occurring politically that have in fact left many people feeling threatened or having their loved ones feeling threatened. There have definitely been different types of losses experienced. And then there's the witnessing and knowledge about trauma to others, again, related to all of those different events. And so what happens when our brain is experiencing some type of trauma? Well, in honesty, it really shuts down in some ways because it goes into a survival mode. In the midst of something that's deeply distressing or deeply disturbing, we get an activation of our fight, flight, or freeze response. And it could be different, or it could be all of those things depending upon how you function. So that means some of you, when you thought about what this year has brought on for you, You may have jotted down things about feeling numb or feeling out of touch with your emotions. Some of you may have said, I just feel really anxious all the time, or hypervigilant. That's never been the way I functioned before. And some people may, again, feel hopeless or just become withdrawn or depressed. What I want to emphasize is that none of these are right or wrong in terms of how you should be feeling. It is a natural response to, again, this combination of all of these different events that are occurring that really are, in so many ways, outside of our control. So that's what happens in the midst of uncertainty, anxiety, and fear. And people have definitely reported feeling and experiencing a lot of that in 2020. Many of you have heard me talk before about what happens to our bodies when we're under these high levels of stress, and when we feel activated. And we talk about how it, increases our cortisol and other endocrine functions in our body. And over time, what that does to us in terms of affecting our memory and our concentration, how it affects us at the physiological level, meaning that we may start to experience medical issues or chronic health conditions, that it can increase our susceptibility to pre-existing health conditions, that in many ways it can impact even just our aging process because of this constant flood of stress hormones. Something else that, again, is pretty much related to COVID, and especially with a lot of the social distancing, is the need to talk about what happens when we are socially isolated over long periods of time. So I remember even back to March 2020 when social distancing started, and everyone was thinking, okay, well, this will be, 30 days, maybe 60 days. Some of us may have said, this could be a couple of months. And most people felt pretty optimistic that they could socially isolate and distance and work from home for, again, 30 to 90 days. And what we've experienced over time is a much, much longer duration. And so we're beginning to talk more about what is the impact of social isolation, or at least decreased social connection for us as people, because we are social by nature. What we're seeing are some of those same neurochemical changes, in addition to other ones. So increased stress hormones with all of those impacts that I previously mentioned. But we're going even to the literature on things like the impact of individuals or babies and toddlers and children who have been in undernourished environments or in orphanages, and what happens when people are in social isolation for long periods of time. We notice changes in the brain, and there are decreases in the positive neurochemicals that keep us happy, like serotonin and even things like dopamine. We're noticing physical changes in the body because we're not moving about as much. And so we're starting to see some muscle atrophy. And even for those of us who have previously had desk jobs for long periods of time, we're not even walking to our car as much, or walking to lunch and to restaurants. So even just the decrease in that little bit of movement is impacting us at the body level. We're in front of computers more so than ever. And so just to be aware that physiologically, in terms of our social emotional functioning, all of these things are issues that we need to be more aware of and thinking about how we can intervene. Because cumulatively, we know that these things place us at increased risk for depression and anxiety. And so many of you are either attorneys practicing or still in the law profession, and we've talked about some of the factors that increase risk for depression and anxiety amongst attorneys and law professionals in general. And so I just want us to be really aware that this places us at increased risk. Not only that, this is the time of year where I'm really cautioning people to be aware of things like seasonal affective disorder, that we're having, shorter days and less sunlight, and that places us in our circadian rhythms at risk, and really exacerbates our risk for depression for those who are already susceptible. What we also know is these cumulative impacts from what's going on with our body, the social distancing, the lack of contact, even touch with others, places us at increased susceptibility for substance abuse and alcohol use. And so this is something that we're already finding in the research, that over this COVID pandemic, that the rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, alcohol use have all gone up. And then also, I mentioned those pre-existing health conditions that they can either develop or we can worsen those that are already occurring. And this is particularly troubling because we know that these are the individuals who are going to struggle the most, even if they were to contract COVID. So we want to be aware of these things. We want to be aware of the red flags. So again, it's not abnormal for us to feel disconnected. It's not abnormal for us to feel a little bit more anxious about not knowing what's going to happen next. It's not abnormal for us to feel a little bit numb and say, I'm just tired. I'm just tired and I want to disconnect a little bit. But what we do want to be aware of is when there's a persistence in negative thoughts, or it becomes chronic and you just can't shake it off. Or again, if your baseline for a few drinks a week has now turned into a few drinks per night. Significant changes in health status, or even impairments in functioning. And I've spoken before about, again, this is when you're unable to get your work done over long periods of time. You're feeling like you're not able to get out of bed. It's really impacting you interpersonally. It's impacting you in terms of your occupation, or even just your day-to-day functioning. So if you recognize that you have not showered in a couple of days because you just don't feel like it, that might be one of those red flags to be paid more attention to. If you find yourself in that situation, I want you to be aware of some of the assistance that is out there. So all of you who are, again, available, all of you have available to you the Bars Cares program. And if you then use those sessions, you can also use the EAP programs for some of your jobs. There is individual outpatient therapy that you can seek out at the private level. And also talking about what you're experiencing with your primary care physician is very important. And they can help you identify whether there are other strategies that you can utilize, or if there's a need for something like medication management. What I like to do now is to shift from thinking about what are all the ways that this impacts us in not so positive ways, to really thinking about what can we do moving forward to make this better. And so I want to first start out by thinking about the distinction between hope and expectation. We hold on to what our expectations were for 2020. I think many of us are going to be left feeling pretty disappointed and in comfortable positions of just not knowing. And so instead, I'd like for us to turn to that concept of hope, hoping that things are going to turn out, but also recognizing that we don't have control over, again, so many of these different factors. This begins with kind of developing a new mindset. And what I mean by that is really shifting the way we set goals. That's going to be maybe our first strategy, thinking about the way we set goals. So many of us are familiar with SMART goals, where we think about, okay, I'm going to set these specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. We're all told that. This is the way you become effective and productive. Well, developed a different model, and it's called COVID. And what COVID stands for is the pandemic version of how we can think about goal setting. The C stands for capacity. And so when you think about how you set your goals, ask yourself, what are your current available resources? And by that, I mean physical, emotional, mental, time even, as well as financial. And if you don't have it, then you can shift that goal to something lower on the list. I want you to think about setting goals with the mind for openness. So just being ready to pivot because things are ever changing. We've seen this with COVID. We don't know if we're in phase 2, 2.5, back to phase 2, phase 3. What does that mean? So really being flexible so that you're not placing limitations or restrictions on yourself that are going to always be open to change, not necessarily, again, within your control. I'd like for us to think about setting goals based upon our values. So focusing on the spirit of what you'd like to achieve rather than the specifics. An example of that may be trying to set your highest priority at any given time. So I ask myself every day, do I need to focus on self-care and working out? Or do I need to come into the office and focus on building a higher caseload? Which is the highest priority for me now? And given what we've talked about in terms of, again, impacts on our physical and emotional well-being, I've decided I need to ramp up my self-care because that will allow me to be more effective in terms of my caseload. The same thing for individuals who are parents. Which is more important right now? That all of the clothes are picked up off the floor in the teenager's room, or that your teenager who's not able to get out and socialize with friends in the same way or to go and play soccer, that they're actually happy right now, that they're not screaming or yelling at the top of their lungs. So thinking about being values-based, what is most important at that particular time? The I in this COVID goal-setting model stands for immediacy. So really separating out your larger goals into smaller ones. So that way you're accomplishing something in the immediate and you can feel good about it and you can feel like there is something within your control. And then the D in this model stands for drivers. And this is just being aware of your motivation for setting certain goals. Is it anxiety? Is it fear? Is it something else? So I've given this model to parents to think about their homeschooling. And the example I give is which is more important at that time, that they get that assignment uploaded at that very moment, or that, again, you kind of have peace in the home because really the assignment can be uploaded later and you can talk to the teacher about it. So thinking about this new pandemic version for how you're going to establish your goals to take some of that pressure off of yourself and to really shift towards things that are going to bring you closer to wellness as opposed to driving you crazy. So that's one way we can think about managing. I want to offer some other practical strategies as well, though. When people ask, where do I start? I always go back to prioritizing your basic needs. And so for us, I'm going to talk about sleep. And I always encourage individuals to really think about their baseline. If your baseline has previously been that you slept 6 hours a day, and now you're sleeping significantly more or less, that's a big change in your baseline. Think about where you started. And then if there are real disruptions, here's some strategies that you can think about to reset your sleep. One is just adopting a sleep routine. And that means, again, is there something soothing or relaxing? A cup of tea that you can drink before bed? Is there a favorite funny show or a favorite book that you can read to really calm your mind from thinking about, again, the racial climate, who's going to win the election, or, again, what's going to happen as a result of new COVID restrictions? So really implementing a sleep routine, something that brings you peace, something that brings you calm, that you can consistently do. Some individuals, particularly those who are struggling with sleep because they have anxiety, I encourage the use of a weighted blanket. And I actually have one sitting on my lap right now. I like to take power naps. And how do you get in like a 10-minute nap that doesn't leave you feeling more groggy? I will wrap up in this blanket and I can take a 10-minute power nap that restores me. And it feels like I've been sleeping for 2 hours. And so for individuals who are having trouble sleeping at night, you may want to try a weighted blanket. Using blackout blinds. that's something that can be really helpful for individuals who are having disrupted sleep or individuals who are having difficulty falling asleep. And there are many, many sleep apps that you can use and devices that play nature sounds or calming music. You can actually buy a machine, a sleep machine or noise machine from, what is it, Bed Bath and Beyond, or off of Amazon. You can use just different apps or different programs that are on YouTube as well. So any and all of these things can be tried in order to try and give you good restorative sleep that we know is so important for our mental as well as our physical well-being. So that's one of our basic needs. We gotta make sure that that's in place. We're getting adequate, good sleep. The other thing is about nutrition. And so where is this mask? It's nice to give a presentation in the office because it means I'm not wearing my mask. Yesterday I had to wear a mask for 8 hours while testifying. And so I literally felt like I wasn't getting any oxygen for the whole day. And even more so, it meant that the amount of water that I typically drink during the day was significantly less. And this is something that, again, impacts our body. So it's about staying hydrated. And there are lots of nice, cheap ways to make sure that you do this, whether it's getting a water bottle and ensuring that you're drinking 2 or 3 of these a day. Or some people, they say, I'm going to just make sure that I schedule in my water time because it's so important. And that, again, is the exact result of, again, kind of COVID and the fact that we're wearing masks so much of our day. Other aspects of nutrition to think about is really decreasing those increases in carbs and stress-related eating and replacing that with maybe even just one new food a week. So what can you do to reset and get back into a more balanced diet? Because so many of us have had that impacted during this pandemic period. Trying to avoid eating late, particularly for individuals who are having difficulty sleeping. Meal prep is something that's been really helpful for individuals and even families to do together to make sure that they are focusing on their basic needs that have somehow gotten, again, really discombobulated during this pandemic period. After the basic needs, I encourage a self-care plan. And I always talk about the 3 legs of self-care: your mind, your body, and your spirit. So let's talk about some practical strategies for addressing each of these. Let's start with our mind. And the model that I'm most focused on right now is encouraging mindfulness and also self-compassion. So most people have heard of mindfulness. They think of it as a form of meditation, but really it's about paying attention to the present moment without judgment. What's going on right now? We cannot at this point predict what's going to happen in November. It's important to think about it. It's important to be planful about it. But given our day-to-day need to focus on work and self and family, it's really challenging to do that when we're constantly focused on things in the future that we can't predict. So let's be present focused. What's happening right now? We're not going to focus on the past and regrets or the future, but in that particular moment, whether it's for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or for an entire day, we're going to focus on how things are. Not how we feel they should be, but how they are and without judgment. So that's the mindfulness component. What I'd like to do is to also make sure that we are using compassion for others and self-compassion for ourselves. So how do we extend kindness and understanding to ourselves rather than self-criticism and judgment when, as I tell everybody, I say it feels like the entire world is on fire. When people ask, how are you doing? I say, well, I'm doing really well considering that the whole world feels like it's on fire. So I tell myself, you know, you're doing the best that you can today. I'm going to focus on being kind and compassionate. These are ways in which I remind myself and I give myself comfort and caring, even during these times that feel really painful and struggle for me and for so many other people for different reasons. Something else that I also do as part of this self-compassion is to recognize that this experience is just part of the larger human experience. This is part of growth. This is part of figuring things out. We never stop adulting. And so I don't make it going to be my entire existence. This is just one particular part. What I really try and do is to remind people, don't try to bypass the pain and hurt. So many of us are just saying, we just got to keep going, we just got to keep going, we got to keep going. We don't get an opportunity to sit down and allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling and to acknowledge that. It is okay to feel sad. It is okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel hurt. And I'm going to sit with it. And then when it's time to go, I'm going to move on. So I'm not going to repress it and hold it in, because that's not good for my body. But I'm going to acknowledge it and recognize it. So that's what it means to be mindful and self-compassionate to yourself. One way that you can practice this is to just take a moment to brainstorm a self-compassion mantra that you can use when you're experiencing something uncomfortable or unsettling. You just saw something in the news, you want to cuss, you want to scream, you want to cry, you want to just go back to bed. What can you tell yourself? I didn't get that client called back. I didn't get this report out. Rather than beating up on yourself about it, what can you say to yourself that utilizes a self-compassion mantra? So again, mine here is, I'm doing my best right now. So write that down and put it somewhere that you can easily access it when needed. As I've talked a lot about how this impacts how we feel, but then also how our bodies are even functioning, I want to offer some strategies and suggestions for even rebooting yourself. So how can you reboot your brain? Because the impacts, again, on concentration, memory, early cognitive decline, these are all real. So these are some quick and easy things that you can do. We know that drinking a glass of water actually activates our bodies. It activates our brain. So just drink a glass of water. I encourage individuals to discover essential oils. So many people have essential oils in their desk. Experiment with those. Do you like lavender or eucalyptus? What can it do to wake you up, to reactivate your brain? There's a lot of research out there regarding what we call brain gym exercises and what we know about how that can, again, improve brain functioning. Something like giving yourself 5 wall push-ups that you can do in just a minute or so can help to reboot your brain. And then I'd like for you to all try here the Lazy 8 exercise, where you're just taking your finger. And what we're doing here is we're activating both sides of our brain. Say, are you awake? Okay. This is a very quick and easy way to just offer yourself some stimulation that's needed from, again, hours and hours of just sitting. You can do that on paper. You can do that in the air. Okay. Very beneficial. And you can also just take a minute or so and look up other types of brain gym exercises that you can do to help reboot your brain. As part of that mind, body, and spirit stool of self-care, I want to offer some other strategies for physical care. And so I encourage you to schedule movement breaks. People are like, well, what do I do at my desk? Any type of movement is helpful. And, we have these Apple Watches that tell us to stand up. That's one important part of physical care. But you can use apps like the Desk Yogi. That's free. And if it's not free as an individual, then there are many companies that also offer that as a employee service. You can go on YouTube. What's a quick 2-minute movement break that I can do from my desk? All of these things have been shown to be beneficial to really improving just kind of the physical condition that we find ourselves in. I'd like for us to talk a little bit about using these computers. So most of you know that I'm a child psychologist in training. And so over all the years, we're always talking with parents about how can we help our kids decrease their screen time? What does the American Academy of Pediatrics say? 1 hour screen time a day. Why is that? And we tell the children, it's going to rot your brain. It's bad for your eyes. And now we and the children are on these devices for sometimes 8, 10, 12 hours a day for work plus recreation combined. And so we've learned that there are things called Zoom fatigue and how that's impacting our brain. We've learned about the impact of too much blue light and how that then affects our sleep and it disrupts our ability to fall asleep. So I really encourage individuals to utilize strategies that are going to prevent eye strain and Zoom fatigue. So a lot of us now are getting glasses that are anti-glare or that decrease the amount of backlight. You can reduce those settings on your phones. You can purchase special screen protectors for your computer that are going to decrease that glare from constantly looking. Something else that I encourage people to do is that when you are constantly on Zoom and other meetings, is that you not make eye contact directly with the person. Because what it actually is doing is creating this incongruence between us looking at someone who's 3D, but we're only seeing them in 2D. So for some people, and even the children, they're developing headaches and migraines. Some are actually experiencing kind of a form of vertigo or car sickness because of, again, the incongruence that's occurring. So whenever you're finding yourself constantly on these screens, make sure that you spend time looking away or not making direct eye contact with the person who you're talking to. And most of the time they can't tell. I don't think you can tell I'm not looking at you right now. So that's a really important part of, again, kind of brain and eye health. I encourage individuals to prioritize some outdoor time as we find ourselves, again, in home offices or having less face-to-face interaction with people, to go outside and get fresh air, to make sure that we're getting sunlight throughout the day, because that's already decreasing seasonally, but that's compounded by the fact that, again, we're doing fewer and fewer things face-to-face. Another strategy that I think is really important to implement is focusing on an ergonomic work setup. And this is true not just for us as adults, but for even our children. Go back to kind of industrial psychology and all of this time and energy that was focused on research saying that there's a certain way in which your laptop should be exactly eye distance away of a certain, what is it? I think it's like 12 inches or 20. Please don't quote me on that. But that you shouldn't constantly be on laptops, and you should make sure that your arms are appropriate height and you're not over flexing your wrist. So there are all these decades of research about what it means to have an ergonomic work setup and the impacts that that has on our bodies. So now that, again, so many of us have been pushed into using these types of setups more and more often, I want you to be mindful about how your workstations are set up. If you need to put something beneath your feet in order to make sure that your legs are 90 degrees instead of hanging down, those are things that we know impact the way our bodies are moving and ultimately, again, our overall health. And then just thinking about any form of exercise. How can I exercise? I'm afraid to go to the gym. Well, if you have stairs in your house, rather than going up your stairs, go up your stairs, down your stairs, and then back up your stairs. Think about going outside, maybe doing some work from the porch. Just even that amount of exposure to outdoor time has been shown to be really beneficial for improving our physical care. Walking, any form of exercise is going to be beneficial. I'd like for us to think about ways in which we can nurture our spirit as well. So we've talked about our mind, talked a little bit about our physical bodies. Let's talk about our spirit. And this is something that is very unique to you as a person. It's individualized. What will be your own practice? So for some individuals, they're spending more time in reflection through prayer or journaling. We've talked about focusing on things like meditation or mindfulness. How can you incorporate breathing into your day? Whether it's when you're first in bed before you get out, or when you're getting ready to get into bed. And for those of you who are saying, I don't know where to start, there are a number of apps that can be used in order to help guide you through meditation or breathing exercises. Again, your Apple Watch, Apple phone has one that can, again, encourage you to take moments, just breathe throughout the day. Calm is my favorite app that I use often, but there are a number. It's limitless, and most of them cost nothing at all. They're free. I've encouraged people to think about creating a nurturing space for themselves, particularly now that we're at home more than ever. Or it may be in your office, even though you're working remotely with clients. And so that can mean setting something up where it's cozy, where you have candles, where you can then engage in things like journaling or meditation. It may be just a different space that doesn't remind you of all the things you have laid out across your desk. So what would your nurturing space look like? Is it the porch swing? So just opportunities to step away, to be very present focused, and to just nurture your spirit. And then earlier, you heard me talk about taking media timeouts. Right now, because we're not seeing people as much as we were previously, the uptick in things like Facebook and Instagram has actually increased. And that can be incredibly powerful for connecting. However, it can also increase concerns. It can increase anxieties. It increases knowledge about other traumatic things going on. This is particularly true within communities of color, where we talk about watching trauma porn, as it's called, day in and day out, with all of the incidents of things from police brutality to what's going on that is differentially impacting communities of color or oppressed groups. So take the opportunity to say, not today. I want to keep my mind, I want to keep my body free of that increased stress. And then you can come back to it as you feel ready. I think that play is one of the most important things we can do for our mind, bodies, and our spirits. So use this opportunity now to think about, what is it like to go back in color? I can still plant fall things in my garden right now. I did, I think maybe like 3 weeks ago. Exploring nature. Trying different games out, whether they're solitary games or connecting with other individuals via online games, anything that's interactive. Trying to take up new hobbies. These are all ways that you can nurture your spirit. Okay. And then thinking about reconnecting with your community. So scheduling time for family and friends, even remotely. And so more than just a phone call of how you're doing, but I find that families and friends now are scheduling Zoom book clubs. They are scheduling times for birthday parties remotely. These are things that, again, people are finding more of a necessity to make sure that it's scheduled in. And that's one way we can reconnect. You can find ways to volunteer, again, even at a distance. So what can be done remotely? And it's so often people are thinking, oh my gosh, this is like so much. I'm not sure I can do all of this. I encourage you to think about what we know to be the health benefits of things like volunteering and feeling like you're doing something within your control in order to maximize our health and well-being. So it's actually, again, kind of feeding, like I was saying, feeding your soul, feeding that spirit, making sure that you're doing something where you feel like something is going to occur. That's even true for community engagement and service. So finding ways to really reconnect. Yeah, all of that. I want you to do all of that. No, I don't want you to do all of that. Not all at once. Um, what I'd like for you to do is to maybe set a goal and then just to begin. This was a post that I made a couple of weeks ago. I said, just begin. Begin by doing one push-up, by walking one lap, by drinking one glass of water, reading one page, writing one page, meditating 1 minute. It all just begins with just one. So just start anywhere. And then I'd like for us to think about the unexpected gifts. With all of this time that we've had now to reflect, which for some is, again, it brings upon these moments of anxiety and angst, and for others is offered opportunities to say, I want to identify some new possibilities. So I'd like for you to ask, what have been the unexpected gifts of 2020? Because the way we make meaning of things, the way we reframe things, that also has huge implications for our social emotional adjustment. So what can you identify for yourself, for your family, your job, your community? More time to connect. I've had more table conversations, perhaps with my children or with my loved ones. And then what areas of growth can you anticipate for yourself or your family or your job or your community? So if we're always looking for those unexpected gifts, it will leave us feeling more positive overall. Okay. Know that has just felt like a tremendous amount of strategies. And for some people, that may have left you feeling more anxious than more calm. So I want to talk about a settling out practice, something that you can do as you end your workday or in the middle of your workday, or sometimes maybe even to start your workday. What can you do to help yourself get grounded when you are feeling overwhelmed or aroused? So grounding is anything that you can do to alleviate nervousness or times when your body just feels hyper aroused. I want you to think about focusing on what's actually happening with your body. Don't focus on racing thoughts, disturbing sensations. And when we do these types of grounding activities, we try to use our senses. We think about what we can see if we have our eyes open or we're in nature. Or we think about what we can hear or what we can feel, and all of that helps us become present to right now, rather than focusing on what may happen, rather than focusing on all the things outside of our control at that particular point in time. So let's take a moment to actually ground ourselves. We're only going to do this for about 90 seconds. And there are different ways that you can ground. For some people, it's about scanning your room and just focusing on colors. You can do this visually. Notice shades of yellow, the notebooks on my desk, and how those contrast with the blues. Just focusing on that moment. Or I could focus on the smells and the sounds around me. Perhaps it's the feeling of my chair or this weighted blanket. Just noticing that. And for those of you who are still looking for a way to ground, just take a moment to notice, like, even your own body. As you're sitting with your hands held together, what does that feel like? Your hands warm? Are they cold? Are they sweaty? What does the air feel like around you? The chair underneath you, the feet underneath, the ground underneath your feet. You take a moment to just focus on that. That is a grounding mindfulness practice. And even just 90 seconds can help our bodies down-regulate, can help bring us to a place of more calm. can help reset us so then we can go back to the other aspects of our day and our work. Let's just take another 10 or 20 seconds. And that is a way to ground. I want to leave us with a quote by Dr. Maya Angelou. And I work with kids quite a lot, and kids always bring you in these really gross stories. But I always find a way to say, oh my gosh, that's actually pretty cool. We think about butterflies. We think about the caterpillar, and they go in, and they break out of this cocoon, and they're all beautiful. Well, what I didn't realize that, again, some 10-year-old told me about was that the caterpillar is actually decaying within itself. And so it's icky and gross and gushy and all these other things inside the cocoon. Nothing that we really want to identify with. But when they come out, again, none of us could say that it isn't a beautiful experience and sight to see this butterfly. And so this brings me back around to the quote, because we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely do we admit the changes it's gone through to achieve that beauty. And so while some of us may feel like a decomposing caterpillar right now inside of a cocoon, I'd really like for us to shift focus to thinking about what can we do to make sure that on the other side of that, we come out in a state that's much more pleasant and beautiful and healthy, and one that really exemplifies well-being. So that is where I want to leave you in thinking about how you're going to really create your own wellness plan, so that the rest of 2020 and moving into 2021 is one where you can see yourself being in a much more positive and pleasant place than where many of us feel ourselves being right now. And with that being said, I think we have exactly 5 minutes left for questions. I think Kate is going to open up either the chat or the Q&A box, and you can feel free to put any questions in. And I have about 5 minutes, and I'm happy to answer anything that you post. And thank you. So she just opened up the chat, and you can message me and it will come to me directly. If there are any questions? And oh, thank you very much. I am going to send, I think I've already sent the slides to Fran. And so if you'd like a copy of those, please contact her so that you can have these resources available for you, and you can go back and create your own wellness plan. You can go and look up some of the different apps that I mentioned. So Fran has posted her email in the chat feature, and you can email her and she will then share the slides with you as well. Okay. Perfect. Well, Fran, do you have any announcements? Fran also noted she will send an update about the CLE credits.
Yes, yeah, just put that in the chat. So we're going to submit our application, and as soon as we've heard from the state bar, we will send an email through the district bar listserv updating you about that.
Okay. So there is a question about ideas about how to step away to get a break. I'm kind of an artsy person. And so I like to create things. So sometimes if I want a break in my space, there's my cute little sign that I've made for my door, taking a break. Sometimes it's just about going to your car to sit for a moment. I see more people now using their car to take a break than ever before. So any space that actually resets you, I am moving from this square to this square, is an opportunity to take a mental and a physical break. So it doesn't have to be anywhere fancy, and you don't have to get on a plane and go somewhere. In regards to weighted blankets, there aren't any specific brands that I would recommend. I've ordered dozens of different types for clients and so forth off of Amazon, and they all function really, really well. I sent my daughter, a college student, definitely she went off with her weighted blanket and uses it every night. So any brand will work. It'll be effective. And I also would, recommend to any of you to think about how you can apply some of these strategies to homeschooling with your children as well, or virtual schooling. I'm not sure what we call it. Those things I've shared with parents as well, some of the very same strategies. There's a question about the particular pressure on attorneys who see themselves as helping others, but have trouble helping each other. So many different, again, mantras we can use. I talk about the fact that we want to give people the best of ourselves, not the last of ourselves, and that we can't pour from an empty cup. And so I always emphasize that the more we do for ourselves actually allows us to do more for others. And that's something that we haven't always been conditioned to do in helping professions. And so we have to actually practice that as a mantra. I'm doing this for myself. I'm saying no so that I can say yes to something else later. Or I'm saying no so that I don't actually do it with resentment. So there's a strong link between being able to set boundaries and actually being compassionate to self and others. I think that the practice of gratitude is extremely important. And I get up every morning and I write down 3 things that I feel grateful for. For some people, they do that at night, and it's a wonderful way to just kind of reset. I'm grateful to have a job. I'm grateful that I'm able to have healthy food. All of these things remind us to be present focused rather than to be fear-based or set in regrets thinking about the past. Suggestions for breaks for parents and kids. Yes, parents need time away. You cannot leave them on the doorstep at their grandparents' house, as my grandchildren have been found. But it is important for them to also figure out ways to curate their own lives. And so this has left us in a really interesting position where we want our children to be a little bit more independent. So I've actually set up, and we're probably going to run over time here, but I have, again, an acronym. It's called BOARD. So what happens when the children are bored? Well, you ask them, have you done something outside? Have you done something for your body? Have you tried a new craft or activity? So if you put that up and they know that they're to actually try and work through some of those things before they come and ask for your assistance, you're actually encouraging them to become a little bit more self-sufficient and to know how to curate their own lives. Also, allowing them to understand that if a particular sign is on the door, it means that you'll need to wait. And unless there's blood or something broken, it's not an emergency. It goes back to that COVID definition of immediacy. It's okay. It can wait. I understand you spilt milk on the floor, and it'll still be there in an hour, and mommy or daddy won't be upset about it. So really using these same strategies to think about being very value-based, and really introducing just less stress in your household during this period of time. I can't remember what the other letters of board are. I'll send them out via email. Something about doing something outside. Yeah, just completely blanked my mind. If you email me directly, I'll be happy to tell you what board means. Or you can make it up and your kids won't know the difference. Okay. Well, thank you all for your questions and your time, and I hope some of these strategies are helpful for you. Yes, read, explore. Sure. Oh, look at that. Okay. Thank you. Read, explore, draw. Those are parts of board. Okay. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye-bye.